Somewhere in Germany tonight, a machine the height of the Statue of Liberty is turning in the dark. It has not stopped for Christmas. It has not stopped for anything. 5 people are aboard it. Stay with me, because the strangest fact about this machine arrives at the very end. Before we continue, just wanted to let you know that we have heard your feedback and we're now on Spotify. Go through the link in the description to join us there for a rich listening experience. Let me put you somewhere first. You are standing at the edge of a beet field in the Rhineland, in the west of Germany, close to the Dutch border. It is late. The land here is flat and generous, and has been farmed for a very long time. There are hedgerows. There is the smell of wet clay. Somewhere behind you a farmhouse light is on, and beyond that, nothing but fields folding away into the dark. And there is a sound. It is not a roar. That is the first surprise. And it is worth sitting with for a moment, because almost everything you are about to learn about this machine will be the opposite of what you expect. The largest thing on land does not announce itself the way you think it will. What the people who live here describe is a high, slow creak, a metal complaint carried across the fields on the night air, rising and falling as the wind decides. It echoes off the low hills. It arrives before the machine does, sometimes by a kilometer or more. The farmers at the rim of the Garsweiler mine have lived inside that sound for years. One of them, a man named Norbert Winson, whose family farm sits right at the edge of the pit, has said that the first thing anyone needs to understand about it is not how big it is that it never stops moving. It runs in the day. It runs at night. It runs on Sundays. It runs on Christmas. That is not poetry. That is a schedule. The Garsweiler mine works in 3 shifts, around the clock, and it lifts somewhere between 20 and 25 million tons of brown coal every single year. The machine making that sound is one of the reasons it can. It has been working this particular corner of Germany since the year 2001, and it has been working somewhere in this country since 1978. Which means that if it were a person, it would be old enough to have grandchildren. Its name is Bagger 288. That is all the name it gets. Bagger is simply the German word for excavator. 288 is a serial number. Nobody sat in a room and workshopped it. Nobody focus grouped it. A German company called Krupp built it for a mining firm called Rheinbraun, and somewhere in a ledger, it became the 288th of its kind, and that was that. The most famous machine on Earth is named the way a filing cabinet is named. Now let me tell you what is actually out there in the dark, making that sound. It is 96 meters tall, 220 meters long, 46 meters wide. It weighs 13,500 tons. Those are numbers. And numbers slide off the mind at this hour, so try these instead. It is taller than the Statue of Liberty, torch included. It is heavier than 8,600 cars. If you laid it down in a city street, it would take up 2 full blocks, and then some. And it is a vehicle. That is the part that refuses to sit still in your head. This is not a building. It is not a bridge. It is not a factory. It has tracks underneath it, and it moves, under its own control, across open ground, whenever the work requires it to be somewhere else. At the front of it, a wheel turns. That wheel is over 21 meters across, about the height of a 7-story building, and set around its rim are 18 steel buckets. The wheel rotates slowly and continuously, and each bucket in its turn bites into the earth, lifts a load, and tips it inward onto a belt. Then the next one. Then the next one. It does not dig the way a shovel digs, in strikes and pauses. It grazes. It is closer to a mouth than a tool. That is the creak you can hear from the beet field. That is 18 buckets, coming around, one after another, all night, for decades. Here is the number that ends this chapter, and I want you to hold it loosely, the way you hold anything at this time of night. Aboard that machine right now, at 96 meters of steel and 13,500 tons of weight, moving Earth by the hundreds of thousands of tons. There are 5 people. Not 500, not 50, 5. There is a small kitchen up there. There is a toilet. There is a cab with a view over half of North Rhine-Westphalia, and a person sitting in it, with a coffee going cold, watching a wheel turn. We are going to spend tonight with them. We are going to work out why Germany decided to lift the roof off its own countryside. We are going to follow this machine on the slowest, strangest journey any vehicle has ever made. And we are going to find out why the largest machine on Earth is not, technically, the largest machine on Earth. But not yet. For now, just the field, and the dark, and that slow creak coming across it. To understand why a machine like that exists, you have to go back a long way before the machine. Because the Bagger 288 is not really an answer to an engineering question. It is an answer to a geological accident that happened about 20 million years ago in a warm and swampy place that is now a beet field. Here is what that place was. West of Cologne, there is a stretch of land about 2,500 square kilometers across. It looks unremarkable. Farms, motorways, small towns with long names. Underneath it is a rift. The ground here has been slowly pulling apart along a set of faults running from the northwest to the southeast. And as it pulled apart, it sank. Geologists call it the Lower Rhine embayment. It has been sinking for tens of millions of years, and it is still sinking now, very gently, under the tractors and the church spires. A basin that sinks slowly is a basin that fills. For a long stretch of the Miocene, roughly 26 to 6 million years ago, this sinking ground sat right at the edge of the sea. The North Sea came in. The North Sea went out. It did this again and again, over millions of years, and in between the floodings, the land became mire. Vast wet peat forests, warm, waterlogged, the kind of place where things fall over and never rot properly because there is no oxygen down there to rot them with. That is the whole trick of coal, and it is worth pausing on because it is not intuitive. Coal is not made from things that decayed. Coal is made from things that fail to decay. A tree falls into a swamp, sinks under the water, and the ordinary machinery of rot cannot reach it, so it sits. Then another falls on top of it. Then another, for 7 million years. And then the basin keeps sinking, and sand and clay come over the top, and the weight begins. Peat is mostly water and air. When you bury it under a few hundred meters of sediment, you squeeze both of those out. The peat that grew in this basin was compressed to somewhere between a half and a quarter of its original thickness. What was left, once the water was gone and the pressure had done its work, was brown coal. Lignite. Young, soft, crumbly, still recognizably plant matter if you look closely. If you break a piece open, you can sometimes still see the wood grain. The numbers this produced are difficult to hold in the mind. The main seam of the Lower Rhine region reaches up to 100 meters in thickness. Not 100 meters of coal deposit, 100 meters of coal. A single continuous layer of compressed ancient swamp as deep as a 30-story building is tall, running under farmland for kilometer after kilometer. In total, the region holds something in the order of 55 billion tons of the stuff. Germany is the largest producer of lignite on Earth, and this is a large part of the reason why. So here is the situation. There is an enormous quantity of fuel down there, and it is not very far down. In some places, the coal begins under 40 meters of soil. It is close, it is soft. You could almost dig to it with your hands, given several hundred years and considerable patience. And you cannot mine it. This is the part that surprises people, and it is the hinge on which everything else in this story turns. The obvious thing to do with a coal seam is to sink a shaft and drive tunnels into it, the way Britain and Poland and West Virginia did for 2 centuries. Send men down. Bring coal up. Leave the countryside where it is. The Rhineland will not allow it. The reason is the ceiling. Everything sitting on top of this coal is young, and it is loose. Clays, sands, gravels, laid down after the coal was already coal, never compressed into rock. There is no stone up there. There is nothing with any structural opinion. If you cut a tunnel into the seam and take the coal out, there is nothing above your head but a few 100 meters of wet sand, and wet sand does not form a roof. It forms a decision that has not yet been made. There is also water. This is a river basin that has spent its whole life underwater at intervals, and the ground is saturated. A tunnel here does not simply collapse. It floods and then collapses, or collapses and then floods, and the order is academic to anyone inside it. So the Rhineland presents a very specific and very unusual proposition. It offers you an almost unlimited amount of fuel, sitting close enough to the surface that you can practically smell it, on one condition. You cannot go under it. You cannot go around it. You can only go through everything that is on top of it. And you have to move all of that somewhere else. First, the soil, the clay, the gravel, the fields, the roads, the woods, the villages that have been standing there since before anyone thought about coal at all. Miners have a word for all of that material. Everything that sits between the surface and the thing you actually want is called overburden, which is one of the most quietly honest words in the English language. It is a burden. It is over the top of what you need. And in this corner of Germany, it can be 300 meters deep. Somebody was going to have to lift it. The coal was never the hard part. Coal is soft. A child could dig lignite with a garden trowel. The hard part was the 300 meters of Germany sitting on top of it, and the arithmetic of that problem is what built the Bagger 288. Let me give you the arithmetic, because it is genuinely staggering and almost nobody knows it. Miners measure this with something called the stripping ratio. It is a simple idea. For every ton of coal you want, how much rubbish do you have to move first? At the Garzweiler mine, the ratio has run at around 3:1, and in places closer to 4:1. At the Hambach mine, in its worst ground, it has reached 6:1. 6:1. Think about what that actually means. It means that for every single ton of fuel that leaves that pit and goes to a power station, 6 cubic meters of soil, clay, sand and gravel had to be picked up, carried away and put somewhere else. The coal is the small part of the job. The overburden is the job. Everything else is a side effect. In a single year, the Garzweiler mine has moved somewhere between 130 and 150 million cubic meters of overburden. Try to picture that, and you will fail. So do not try. Just hold the shape of it. Every year, just to get to the coal underneath. Now, in the middle of the 20th century, there was a way to do this. It was the way everyone did it. You bought the biggest excavator you could find, a giant shovel on tracks, and it did what shovels do. Watch a conventional excavator work sometime, and pay attention to the rhythm rather than the size. It swings out, it bites, it lifts, it swings across, it drops the load into a truck, then it swings back, empty, all the way, to bite again. Half of that cycle is the machine doing nothing but returning to where it already was. There is a pause at the bottom of the bite. There is a pause at the top of the drop. There is a truck that has to be there, and when it is not there, everything stops. The truck fills, and then it drives, and then it queues, and then it tips, and then it drives back. Every load is a separate, small event with a beginning and an end. And every one of those beginnings and endings is a moment when several thousand tons of very expensive steel is being paid for and is not moving earth. You can make that machine bigger. People did. The Americans built enormous ones, and they were magnificent, and they still had the same problem, because the problem was never the size of the bite. The problem was the pause between the bites. At 6:1, in a basin holding 55 billion tons, with power stations waiting, The pauses are unaffordable. You are not trying to dig a hole. You are trying to run a river of soil, permanently, in one direction, for 50 years. So the mining firm Rhine Brown went to Krupp with a different question. Not how do we dig faster, how do we stop stopping? The answer already existed in principle, and it is one of those ideas that seems obvious in hindsight and is quietly brilliant. If the pause is the enemy, then take the pause out. Do not use a shovel that swings back empty. Use a wheel. Put your buckets around the rim of a wheel and turn the wheel. Now, the bucket that has just emptied is not traveling backwards to do the job again. It is continuing forwards, around, and coming back to the earth on the far side of the circle. There is no return stroke because the circle has no ends. One bucket enters the ground exactly as the last one leaves it. The cut never breaks. The load never stops arriving. And once the load never stops arriving, you can throw away the trucks. This is the second half of the idea, and it is the half that changes the landscape. If material is flowing off the wheel continuously, you do not need a vehicle to catch it. You need a belt. The material lands on a conveyor inside the machine, travels along it, and passes onto another conveyor and another, and the mine becomes a system of moving rubber that goes on for kilometers, out of the pit, across the countryside, to the power station, or to the place where the soil is being put back. No queue, no drivers, no diesel, no stopping. The engineers have a name for this, and it sounds like nothing at all. Continuous mining, two dull words for the difference between a hole and a machine that eats a county. But there is a price for the elegance, and the price is size. A wheel that never stops has to feed a belt that never stops, which has to feed a mine that never stops. And all of it has to be one connected object, because the moment you break the chain is broken everywhere. The wheel has to be enormous, because the volume is enormous. The arm holding the wheel has to reach an entire mine face, from the top of the cut to the bottom, without moving the body of the machine, because moving the body costs time, and time is the thing you were buying. And the body has to be heavy enough that a 20-meter wheel biting into compacted clay does not simply drag the whole apparatus into the pit. Every requirement multiplies the next one. Bigger wheel, longer arm. Longer arm, heavier counterweight. Heavier counterweight, wider tracks. Wider tracks, more steel. More steel, more power. More power, thicker cable. Rhine Brown asked for a machine that would not stop. Krupp did the sums, and the sums came back with something 96 meters tall. The sums came back, and then something happened that says more about this machine than any of its dimensions do. Nothing happened. For 5 years. That is how long the Bagger 288 took to design and manufacture. 5 years of drawings and calculations and steel being cut in workshops before a single bucket touched a single field. Then it took 5 more years to put it together. 10 years, from the decision to the first scoop. Long enough that a child born the day the project began would have been finishing primary school by the time the wheel first turned. Long enough that engineers who started on it retired before it worked. The final cost came to around $100 million. And there is something worth sitting with in that 10-year figure, because it splits neatly in half, and the second half is stranger than the first. Designing it took 5 years. Fine. You would expect that. But building it took another 5. And the reason is that the Bagger 288 could not be built anywhere except the exact spot where it was going to work. There is no factory that produces these. There is no assembly line, no shipping crate, no low loader in the world that could carry it. A machine 96 meters tall and 220 meters long does not travel. So the pieces traveled instead, thousands of them, out of the Krupp works and across Germany by road and rail, to an open field near a place called Hambach, west of Cologne, where the ground had already been surveyed and the coal was already known to be waiting underneath. And there, in the mud, over 5 years, they assembled it. In the open, in the weather, cranes lifting sections into place, a piece at a time, while rain fell on the half-finished skeleton of the largest land vehicle anyone had ever attempted. For 5 years, the thing sat in a German field, looking less like a machine and more like a shipwreck being built in reverse. The company that ordered it was called Rheinbraun. The name means, more or less, Rhine brown, which is the least romantic possible way of saying the brown coal of the Rhineland. The company that built it was Krupp, and if you know one thing about Krupp, you probably know the wrong thing about Krupp. This was the great steel dynasty of the Ruhr, and the 20th century had been extremely complicated for them. By the 1970s, though, Krupp was doing something else entirely. It was building industrial machinery for a country that had rebuilt itself and now needed enormous quantities of electricity, and the cheapest electricity available to West Germany was sitting under those beet fields. The machine they delivered had a name before it had the one we use. In the paperwork, it was the RB288. Then, at some point, someone simply wrote Bagger 288 on it, which means Excavator 288, and it stuck, the way the plainest name in the room usually does. Construction finished in 1978, and here is where the machine did something that nobody had planned as a headline, but which followed automatically from the physics. Until that year, the heaviest vehicle that had ever moved across the surface of the Earth under its own control was an American machine called the Marion 6360, a colossal stripping shovel working the coalfields of Ohio. It weighed 12,700 tons. It was, by a considerable margin, the largest thing that had ever been driven anywhere. The Bagger 288 weighs 13,500 tons. So in 1978, without any ceremony, in a field in North Rhine-Westphalia, the record for the heaviest land vehicle in human history quietly changed countries. Not because anyone set out to break it, because the arithmetic of 6 to 1 demanded a wheel that big, and a wheel that big demanded an arm that long, and an arm that long demanded a counterweight that heavy, and when you added it all up, you had accidentally built the heaviest moving object ever assembled on land. I want you to notice what is missing from that story. There is no inventor. There is no eureka. There is no photograph of a man in glasses holding a napkin with a sketch on it. Nobody dreamed of the Bagger 288. Nobody wanted it, exactly. It was arrived at, the way a river arrives at the sea, by a series of entirely reasonable decisions, each of which made the next one inevitable. Somebody wanted cheap electricity, which meant lignite, which meant an open pit, which meant overburden, which meant continuous mining, which meant a wheel, which meant this. 10 years, $100 million, 13,500 tons, and not one moment where anyone got to be surprised. In 1978, the cable was connected, the current came up, and somewhere in the middle of all that steel, motors began to turn that have essentially not stopped since. The wheel came around for the first time. 18 buckets went into German soil, and the machine started doing the only thing it has ever done. Everyone photographs the wheel. Almost nobody understands what they are looking at, because from any distance, great enough to fit the machine in the frame, the wheel looks like a detail, a cog on the end of an arm, a bit of the front. It is 21.5 meters across. Stand a 7-story apartment building on its end and roll it into a field, and you have the wheel. That is the detail. That is the small round thing at the tip. Set around its rim are 18 buckets. Each one holds 6.6 cubic meters, which is roughly the volume of a small van, and each one is a piece of hardened steel large enough that a grown adult could stand up inside it and have room to turn around. They are open at the front and open at the back, and there is a reason for that, which we will come to in a moment. Because it is the cleverest thing about the whole arrangement. The wheel is turned by 4 motors. Each produces 840 kilowatts, giving 3,360 kilowatts at the wheel, which the manufacturer likes to compare to the combined output of about 30 small cars, all of them applied to turning one circle. But the speed is the thing that undoes people. You expect violence. Every instinct says that a wheel this size, powered like that, driven into the earth, must be a frightening thing. It must whirl. It must throw soil in an arc across the sky. It turns at a walking pace. Slower, in fact. You can stand at the pit rim and watch an individual bucket go all the way around and lose interest before it finishes. There is no drama in it at all. The wheel simply revolves, patiently, like something grazing, and the earth is not so much attacked as removed by mutual agreement. This is what all that money bought. Not force. Continuity. Here is what happens to a single bucket, and once you have this, you have the machine. The bucket comes over the top of the wheel and begins its descent on the far side, empty, mouth forward. Near the bottom of the circle, it meets the face of the cut, and the teeth along its lip take a slice off the wall of German soil. Not a bite, a shaving. The bucket is not stopping to dig, because the wheel is not stopping. So what it takes is a curl of earth, peeled from the face as it passes through, in one continuous arc, the way you take a strip of skin off an apple. By the time it reaches the bottom of the circle, it is full. 6.5 cubic meters of Miocene sand and clay. Then the wheel keeps turning, and the bucket starts to climb, and it is now carrying a load upward, and everything is fine, because at the top of the arc, the bucket goes over the summit and turns upside down, and gravity does the unloading. Nobody empties these buckets. Nothing pushes the soil out. There is no mechanism, no hydraulics, no clever ejector. The bucket rotates past vertical, and the contents fall out of the open back, exactly as they would from a spoon you have turned over, into a chute waiting in the center of the wheel. That is the entire discharge system. It is the same technology as tipping out a cup of tea, executed at a scale of 13,000 tons. This happens 18 times per revolution, all night, all year, and it has been happening since 1978. Now follow the soil, because it does not stop either. It falls into the chute, and the chute delivers it onto a conveyor belt running back along the arm. The belts on this machine are about 3 meters wide enough that you could drive a small car along one, and they move at something over 18 kilometers per hour, which is faster than the machine that carries them will ever travel in its life. So the picture becomes very strange and very beautiful if you let it. The wheel turns slowly, the buckets rise slowly, the whole apparatus creaks along at the pace of a grazing animal, and inside it, on rubber, invisible from outside, there is a river of soil sprinting rearward at 18 kilometers an hour, continuously, and pouring off the back of the machine onto another belt and another, out of the pit and across the countryside. That is the trick. That is what Reinbraun paid $100 million for. The Bagger 288 does not dig holes. It converts landscape into flow. It stands at the edge of solid Germany and turns it into a moving stream, and the stream does not stop when a truck is late, or when a driver takes lunch, or when it snows, because there are no trucks, and there are no drivers, and the wheel does not know that it is snowing. The arm the wheel hangs from can reach the entire face of the cut on its own, sweeping from the top of the wall to the bottom, so that the enormous body behind it does not have to move. This matters more than it sounds. Moving the body costs time, and time was the whole reason any of this was built. So it stands still and sweeps, like a man mowing a lawn without stepping forward, taking a slice, then another slice, then another, until the wall of earth in front of it has retreated far enough that the thing has no choice but to take a few meters of step. And then it stands still and sweeps again. 18 buckets, one circle, no pause anywhere in it. The question, of course, is how much a machine like that actually eats. 240,000 cubic meters per day. That is the answer, and it is a useless answer, because nobody has ever seen 240,000 cubic meters of anything. So let me spend this chapter making it real, because this is the number the entire machine exists to produce, and it deserves better than being a statistic you nod at and forget. Start with something you already know the size of. Take a football pitch. A full-sized one. The sort with a running track around it. The sort you can picture without effort because you have stood on one. Now dig it. Not a hole in the middle of it. The whole pitch, corner flag to corner flag, straight down. 30 meters deep. That is a 10-story building of empty air where the grass was. That is deep enough to lose a church steeple in. And you would have to walk to the edge and look down into a rectangular void the size of a stadium foundation and understand that this is one day of work for one machine. Yesterday, it did another one. Tomorrow, it will do another one. If the material happens to be coal rather than overburden, the figure is 240,000 tons, and there is a comparison for that too, and this one I find harder to shake off. The coal the Bagger 288 can lift in a single day fills 2,400 railway wagons. 2,400. Line those wagons up and you do not have a train. You have a linear feature visible from an aircraft. A coal train stretching for something in the order of 25 to 30 kilometers of track, standing in a queue. All of it loaded, all of it from one machine, all of it since yesterday morning. The manufacturer offers a different comparison, and it is the one that lands hardest, because it is not about volume at all. It is about people. 40,000 men. That is ThyssenKrupp's own figure for what this machine replaces. 240,000 cubic meters a day is the work of 40,000 laborers with shovels and barrows. A city's worth of men. An entire industrial workforce of the 19th century. Every one of them digging from dawn until dark. All of them wet. All of them exhausted. All of them going home with ruined backs. Compressed into one wheel. And if you would rather have it in vehicles, more than 10,000 dump truck loads a day. 10,000 trucks arriving, filling, driving away, every 24 hours. And if you can imagine the noise and the diesel and the queue of that, you can imagine what the belts made unnecessary. Now let me put the machine back in its context, because on its own it is a curiosity, and in context it is something else. The Garsweiler mine, where it works now, runs 3 shifts a day, and lifts between 20 and 25 million tons of lignite every year. It is not the only bagger there. There is a family of them, and we will meet the family later, and between them they feed something that never gets photographed and matters just as much. The coal does not go anywhere by road. It goes onto belts and onto an industrial railway of the mine's own, and it travels to 2 power stations, Neurath and Niederaussem, which sit a few kilometers away, with their cooling towers standing over the flat land, like something left behind by a larger civilization. And at the far end of that, at 3 o'clock in the morning, in a town somewhere in North Rhine-Westphalia, a fridge hums. That is the shape of the thing. A wheel turns in the dark. Ancient swamp goes onto a belt. The belt goes to a furnace. The furnace boils water. The steam turns a turbine, and the turbine spins a magnet, and the magnet pushes electrons down a wire, and somewhere a light stays on in a corridor that nobody is walking down. There is a chain there, and every link of it is unremarkable, and the whole chain is absurd. 20 million years ago, a tree fell into a swamp in a sinking basin at the edge of the North Sea and failed to rot. It was buried. It was pressed. It waited through the entire rise of the mammals, through the ice ages, through the arrival of people, through the Romans coming up the Rhine, through the whole of recorded history, unmoving, in the dark, 30 meters under what would eventually become a beet field. And then, one night in the 21st century, a bucket the size of a van came around on a wheel and lifted it out. 240,000 cubic meters every day. That is not a machine excavating. That is a machine running geological time in reverse, at a rate of 1 football pitch per rotation of the Earth. Which raises a question, and it is the question that I think is the strangest in this entire story. Something is doing all that. Something is aiming it, watching it, feeding it, correcting it, sitting up there 96 meters above the pit floor, while a wheel converts a landscape into electricity. How many people does it take? The answer is going to annoy you. 5. Not 500. Not 50. 5 people run the largest land vehicle on Earth. You could staff it with a family. You could fit the entire crew of a machine, the height of the Statue of Liberty, around one kitchen table and still have a chair spare. Every day, 240,000 cubic meters of Germany changes location. And the number of human beings involved in that at the sharp end would not fill a taxi twice over. I want to make sure that number does not slide past, so consider the company around it. WE's mining operations in this region have employed thousands of people, 8,000 and more at times, across 4 open-cast mines. Engineers, electricians, planners, surveyors, belt crews, the enormous quiet infrastructure of a coalfield. And on the machine itself, at any given moment, in the middle of all that steel, 5. So the obvious question is what they actually do up there, and the answer is that the bagger 288 is not driven, it is conducted. There is no steering wheel, there is nothing to fight. There is no moment where a man hauls on a lever and the earth trembles. Because if the earth is trembling, then something has gone very wrong indeed. What there is instead is a cab, out towards the front, hung near the wheel, with windows on most sides and a view down into the cut. The operator sits there and watches the face. That is the job. Watching. The wheel comes around, and the bucket takes its curl of soil, and the arm sweeps left, and the operator is reading the wall of the pit, the way a sailor reads water. Is the material dry or wet? Is there sand in this layer, which will run, or clay, which will stick? Is the cut clean? Is the load on the belt even, or is it surging, which will spill? Is that a change in color up there, which might be a different stratum, which might be harder than the last one? Every few seconds, small corrections, that is all. It is closer to flying a very large aircraft than to operating machinery, and the comparison to flying is a fair one in another way too, because most of the time nothing is happening, and the entire value of the person is what they do in the 4 seconds when something is. The rest of the crew are spread through the body, someone at the belts, where the material transfers and where trouble lives, someone on the electrics, someone walking the structure, checking, listening, because a machine of this size talks constantly, and an experienced person can hear the difference between a normal complaint and a serious one. And now the detail that undoes everybody. There is a kitchen up there. The Bagger 288 has an onboard kitchenette. It has a toilet. It has, in other words, plumbing, 96 meters in the air, on a vehicle. Take a moment with that. Somebody, at some point in the 1970s, sitting in an office at Krupp with a drawing of the heaviest object ever built by human beings, had to stop and think about the fact that a man will need to use the lavatory, and they drew it in. They ran the pipes. They found somewhere for a small sink and a kettle. Because of course they did. The machine never stops. 3 shifts, all night, Sundays, Christmas. If it never stops, then the people cannot leave it, and if the people cannot leave it, then the people have to live on it for the length of a shift. And people who live somewhere need somewhere to put a cup. So somewhere In that mass of steel and cable, there is a room with a kettle in it. There is a shelf. There is, presumably, a mug that belongs to someone specific and about which there are strong feelings. There is a chair with the stuffing gone and the sound of the wheel coming through the floor, and a window with a view over half of North Rhine-Westphalia and nothing to look at but weather. I find this the most human fact in the entire story, and I will tell you why. Everything about this machine is inhuman in the literal sense. Its scale is inhuman. Its patience is inhuman. Its appetite is a geological force running on a shift pattern. Nothing about it was designed around a body. It is the single least human artifact anyone has ever assembled and driven across a field. And it has a kettle in it, because whatever else it is still a place where somebody goes to work. Somebody drove there this morning in an ordinary car and parked in an ordinary car park and walked up and hung up a coat. Somebody up there is thinking about a dentist appointment. Somebody is annoyed about a rota. Somebody is on their last shift before a holiday, and somebody else has done this for 30 years and is one of perhaps a few hundred people alive who genuinely knows the feel of this specific machine, the way it behaves in the wet, what that particular noise means. 5 of them, tonight, 96 meters up, in the dark, over a hole the size of a town, watching a wheel turn, which leaves one thing unaccounted for, and it is the thing that keeps all of this alive. 3,000 kilowatts at the wheel, belts running at 18 kilometers an hour, lights, motors, drives, a kettle. Where is the engine? There isn't one. There is no engine, anywhere. Search the whole 220 meters of it, and you will not find a fuel tank, a piston, a radiator, or an exhaust. The heaviest vehicle ever to move across land has no more independent power than a table lamp. It is plugged in. The Bagger 288 requires 16.5 megawatts of electricity, and every watt of that arrives from somewhere else. It is delivered by cable at 30,000 volts from the same grid the machine is helping to feed. Inside the structure, there are more than 120 kilometers of wiring, which is worth saying slowly, 120 kilometers. Enough cable, inside one vehicle, to run from the pit to Cologne and a good way back again. And the cable coming in is not a cable in any sense you have handled. It is a heavy black artery, thick as a man's arm, dragged behind the machine across the pit floor. And it is the only reason any of this exists at all. 16.5 megawatts is the kind of number that means nothing until you convert it. It is the sort of load a small town draws. Thousands of homes, all their kettles, all their lights, all their fridges, all their televisions, all of it going instead into one wheel and a set of belts in a hole in the ground. There is a stray thought here that is either very calming or very much not, depending on how tired you are. Somewhere in the Rhineland, a power station is burning lignite. That lignite was dug out of the ground by the Bagger 288, and a portion of the electricity that power station produces is going straight back down a cable and into the Bagger 288, so that it can dig the lignite that feeds the power station that powers the machine that digs the lignite. It is a snake eating its own tail, and the snake is 13,500 tons, and it has been doing this since 1978. If you are enjoying the shape of this thing, subscribing helps more people find these at 3 in the morning when they need them. That is all. Back to the dark. Now, the obvious question about the cable is why? Why would you design the most powerful land vehicle in history to be helpless without a plug? The answer is that they did not accept a compromise. They removed one. Think about what a fuel tank actually is. It is a heavy thing that goes everywhere with you, containing a heavy thing you will burn, which requires a heavy thing to burn it in, which requires a heavy thing to cool it, and a heavy thing to silence it, and a heavy thing to get the fumes away from the people. Then it has to be refilled, which means a tanker, which means a road, which means a cue, which means a pause. And this machine was built to abolish the pause. The cable has no cue. The cable does not run out. The cable never needs a delivery on a Tuesday, does not care about the price of diesel, does not need warming up in January, does not lose power at altitude or in the wet. It simply arrives, continuously, forever, at 30,000 volts, in exactly the quantity required and no more. An electric motor also has a property that turns out to be the whole reason the thing can work at all. It can produce enormous force at almost no speed and sit there doing it indefinitely without complaint. A diesel engine hates that. A diesel engine at 0 revolutions is not an engine, it is a paperweight, and everything a bagger does is at essentially 0 speed. The wheel barely turns. The tracks barely creep. Every single motion of this machine is the kind of slow, heavy, patient effort that would boil an engine and burn out a clutch. Electricity does not mind. Electricity does not know it is trying. So they took the engine out and threw the concept away, and what was left is not really a vehicle. It is a building that walks, permanently connected to the wall. And that is the strangest inversion in this whole story. So let me put it plainly. Every fact about this machine sounds like a boast, and almost every one is actually a dependency. It is the largest land vehicle ever built, and it cannot leave the property. It has more power at its wheel than 30 cars, and it cannot move a meter if someone somewhere throws a switch. It is fed by a power station that it feeds. It has no autonomy at all. It is not a lion. It is closer to something in an aquarium, enormous, magnificent, and entirely dependent on a system it did not build and cannot survive without. The Bagger 288 is not a triumph over nature. It is a component. It is one organ of a much bigger animal made of pits and belts and cooling towers and grid connections and shift rotors and 120 kilometers of copper. And if any part of that animal stops, the largest vehicle on Earth becomes 96 meters of extremely expensive scrap standing in a field. It cannot even feed itself. It cannot start itself. But there is one thing it does that no other object of its size has ever managed, and it is the exact opposite of everything you would expect from 13,500 tons. It can walk across a lawn without hurting it. 13,500 tons should not be able to cross a field. That is not an opinion. That is what your instincts tell you, and your instincts are usually right about this sort of thing. Heavy things sink. Park a lorry on wet grass, and you will find it there in the spring. So a machine weighing as much as 8,500 cars, moving over soft German farmland, ought to bury itself to the waist within about 4 meters and stay there permanently as a monument to bad planning. It does not. And this is where the Bagger 288 stops being merely big and becomes genuinely clever. Underneath the body, there are 12 caterpillar tracks. Not 2, 12. 8 of them arranged at the front and 4 at the rear, each one 3.8 meters wide, which is to say each individual track is wider than the lane of a motorway. 12 of those spread beneath a chassis 46 meters across. And the effect of that is a number I want you to hold on to because it is my favorite fact in this entire story. The ground pressure of the Bagger 288 is about 1.7 bar, roughly 25 pounds per square inch, which is, more or less, the pressure in a bicycle tire. The heaviest vehicle ever built presses on the earth about as hard as your bike does. Here is how that works, and it is one of those pieces of physics that feels like a trick even when you understand it. Weight is not what sinks things. Pressure sinks things. Pressure is weight divided by the area you spread it over, and the Bagger 288 is spread over an area so enormous that the arithmetic simply gives up. Yes, there are 13,500 tons, but there are also thousands of square meters of steel track lying flat on the ground underneath them, and when you divide the one by the The number that falls out is nothing at all. You already know this principle. You just know it in the other direction. A woman in stiletto heels can put a hole in a wooden floor that an elephant would not make, because the elephant, for all its tonnage, has 4 large flat feet, and she has 2 points the size of a pencil. Snowshoes work for the same reason. A knife cuts not because it is heavy, but because it is thin. The Bagger 288 is the largest snowshoe ever manufactured. And this is not a theoretical curiosity. It is the reason the machine is allowed to exist in a country like Germany, and the manufacturer says the consequence out loud, and it sounds like a lie. When the Bagger 288 travels across soil, gravel, or even grass, it leaves tracks no deeper than a human footprint. Read that again slowly at this hour, because it is worth it. You could walk across a field behind the largest vehicle on Earth, in your own boots, and you would sink in about as far as it did. Not a rut, not a trench, not a wound in the landscape with water standing in the bottom of it. A footprint. The kind of mark a person makes going out to check on the sheep. There is something almost apologetic about that. And it was not sentiment, it was necessity. And you can see exactly why the moment you think about where this machine has to go. It works on farmland. It works on ground that will one day be farmland again. It crosses land the mining company does not own, land that has to be handed back, land with grass on it that somebody cares about. A machine that destroyed everything it walked over would have been legally and politically impossible before it left the drawing board. So they gave it soft feet. There is another consequence of the 12 tracks that is easy to miss and rather beautiful. The tracks are in groups, and the groups can point in different directions, and that is how the thing steers. It has no front wheels, there is no rudder. To turn, it does not swing like a car. Each set of crawlers is angled, and the whole machine is walked around a curve, slowly, in pieces, like a table being edged around a doorway by several people who are trying not to scratch the paint. Its tightest turn takes about 50 meters, and it will not climb. The gradient it accepts is 1 in 18, which is about 5 degrees, which is a slope you would not notice while walking. Anything steeper than a gentle ramp, and the answer is simply no. It is 13,000 tons of machine, and it is defeated by a hill you could ride a bicycle up without changing gear. So put the picture together, because the finished shape of it is strange and lovely, and completely unlike the monster everybody expects. It is the biggest thing that moves. It weighs more than the Eiffel Tower. It eats a football pitch a day, and it goes across a meadow at a gradient of 5 degrees on 12 enormous flat feet at the pressure of a bicycle tire, leaving footprints. And if you followed behind it in Wellingtons a week later, the grass would already be doing fine. There is only one thing left to understand about how it moves. The speed. And the speed is where it becomes almost funny. 10 meters a minute. That is flat out. That is the Bagger 288, with everything it has, nothing in its way, and no reason to hold back. 10 meters a minute is 0.6 kilometers per hour. You walk at about 5. A comfortable stroll, hands in pockets, looking at the hedgerows, is roughly 8 times faster than the top speed of the largest vehicle ever built. An elderly tortoise, properly motivated, would beat it over 100 meters and have time to consider its life afterwards. And that is the fast setting. The machine's specification gives a range, 2 to 10 meters per minute. At the slow end, it covers 2 meters in 60 seconds. If you stood next to it and watched, you would not be able to tell that it was moving at all. You would have to pick a stone and look away and look back a minute later, and the stone would be somewhere else. Now, the joke writes itself, and the joke is wrong, so let me take it apart. The instinct is to think this is a failure. 13,500 tons, $100 million, 16 megawatts, and it cannot beat a pensioner to the post office. All that power, and it is slow. What a shame, what an anticlimax. But speed was never on the list. Speed was never wanted. Speed, in this machine's world, is not a virtue that was sacrificed. It is a defect that was carefully engineered out. Consider what this thing does for a living. It stands at a wall of earth and sweeps a wheel across it. The wheel does the work. The body does not need to go anywhere at all because the arm reaches the whole face on its own, top to bottom, side to side. The perfect Bagger 288 would never move. Movement is what happens when the machine has run out of face to eat and is forced, reluctantly, to take a few steps forward so that it can go back to standing still. Moving is not the job. Moving is the interruption of the job. Given that, why would you build it fast? Faster tracks mean bigger drives, more weight, more cost, more to break, on a system that will spend its entire operational life not using them. It would be like fitting a racing gearbox to a cathedral. There is a deeper reason too, and it is the one that matters. Nothing at this scale is allowed to have momentum. Momentum is mass times velocity, and when the mass is 13,500 tons, the velocity must be almost nothing, or the answer becomes unsurvivable. At a walking pace, this machine would be carrying an energy that no brake could absorb and no structure could shrug off. It could not stop. It would not need to hit anything to destroy itself. The act of trying to arrest it would tear it apart from the inside. At 10 meters a minute, though, it has essentially no momentum at all. It has almost nothing to stop. If something goes wrong, the machine can simply be told to cease, and it will cease, in a meter or so, gently, the way a heavy door closes on a good hinge. The slowness is not weakness. The slowness is what makes 13,500 tons safe to be near. Everything else about how it moves follows the same logic. Its tightest turn takes about 50 meters of ground. It will not climb a slope steeper than 1 in 18, roughly 5 degrees, a rise so slight you would not notice it under your own feet. This is a machine with no interest whatsoever in going anywhere, and that gives it a relationship with time that is completely unlike ours, and completely unlike any other vehicle. Everything we build to move is built to compress time. That is the entire point of a vehicle. An hour of walking becomes 10 minutes of driving, faster, sooner, there. The whole history of transport is a war against the clock, and we have been winning it for 2 centuries. The Bagger 288 is a vehicle that lost that war on purpose. It does not compress time, it spends it. It is a machine whose fundamental unit is not the hour, but the decade. It was 10 years in the making before it did anything at all. It has been working since 1978. It moves at a speed at which a full day of continuous travel, without stopping, would carry it about 14 kilometers, which is a nice afternoon's cycle ride. There is a strange kind of peace in that, and it is why this machine belongs in a video meant for the middle of the night. Everything you did today was in a hurry. Somewhere in Germany, right now, there is a 13,000-ton object that has never once been in a hurry in its entire life, and has still moved more of the earth than almost anything else humans have ever made, purely by refusing to stop. 10 meters a minute, forever. Which brings us to the winter of 2001, when the people who owned this machine looked at a map, looked at the machine, and worked out that they now had to get it to a different mine, 22 kilometers away. And they decided, having considered every other option, to simply switch it on and let it walk there. By February of 2001, the Bagger 288 had done something no machine is supposed to do. It had finished. Not broken down, not worn out, finished. At the Hambach mine, west of Cologne, where it had stood since 1978, the overburden was gone. Every meter of clay and sand and gravel that had been lying on top of that coal for 20 million years had been picked up by 18 buckets and carried away, and what was left underneath was the seam, exposed, black and open to the German sky. The machine had eaten its own job. That is the strange position Rhinebrown found itself in that winter. It owned the heaviest vehicle ever built. The vehicle was in perfect working order. It had been in service for 23 years, and it was good for decades more. And it had nothing left to do, because the only thing it does is remove overburden, and there was no longer any overburden at Hambach for it to remove. 22 kilometers away, at a mine called Garzweiler, there was rather a lot. So the problem was simple to state and almost impossible to answer. Get the machine from here to there. 22 kilometers, 14 miles. On a map, it is nothing. It is a distance you would cycle before lunch without thinking about it. Between the two mines lies ordinary countryside, farmland, hedgerows, a river, a railway line, some roads, and a motorway. And in the middle of it, 13,500 tons of machine, 96 meters tall, 220 meters long, with no engine, 12 enormous feet, and a top speed of 0.6 kilometers per hour. Now, there are only ever 3 ways to move something. Let me take them in order, because the process of elimination here is the most enjoyable part of the whole story. The first is to lift it, put it on something, and carry it. This is how every large object in the world gets moved. It is how bridges are moved, and locomotives, and church bells, and space rockets. There is no crane on Earth that can lift the Bagger 288, and there never will be, because to lift 13,500 tons in one piece, you would need a machine substantially larger than the thing you were lifting, which is a lovely piece of circular reasoning and completely fatal. There is no road that would take it. No bridge on the route would survive a fraction of it. You cannot put it on a lorry, because the lorry does not exist, and the lorry could not be built, and if it were built, nothing could pull it. Cross that one off. The second is to float it. This works beautifully for enormous things, which is why the biggest objects humans build are ships. It is also why the biggest objects humans build are ships. There is a river on the route. It is the Erft. It is about 8 meters wide. Cross that one off. The third is the sensible one. Take it apart. This is what any reasonable person would do, and I want to be fair to it, because on paper it is obviously correct. It was built in pieces, thousands of them, delivered by road and rail, and assembled in a field over 5 years. Everything that goes together comes apart. Unbolt the wheel, take down the arm, dismantle the superstructure, cut the body into transportable sections, put it all on lorries, drive it 22 kilometers, and reassemble it at Garzweiler. It is the only method that has ever been used for anything this size. It is what everyone expects. It is what I would have said, and it is what you would have said. Rhinebrown costed it, and then a group of engineers in North Rhine-Westphalia looked up from the numbers and said, out loud, in a meeting, to their employers, the following words: "We think we should just drive it there. Sit with that for a moment, because I do not think the sheer nerve of it comes across on a first pass." They were proposing to take the heaviest vehicle in human history, a machine the size of a cathedral lying on its side, a thing with no fuel tank and no brakes worth mentioning, which moves at 1/3 of the speed of a walking pensioner, and set it loose across 22 kilometers of the Federal Republic of Germany, across working farmland, across a river, across a railway, across an autobahn, not a test track, not a mine road. Germany, the actual country, with people living in it, and cars on it, and trains running through it on a timetable. They were proposing to walk it home, and the reason they proposed it was not romance. Nobody at Rhinebrown wanted an adventure. There was a number at the bottom of a page, and the number said this was the cheap option, and we will come to exactly why, because it is one of the best counterintuitive facts I know. For now, understand only the decision. In February of 2001, the plan was approved. 70 workers were assigned. A route was surveyed across the countryside between the two mines. Somebody drew a line on a map, And along that line, there were things in the way that would have to be dealt with, one at a time, in the order the machine met them. And then, on a grey morning in the Rhineland, 12 tracks, 3.8 meters wide, began, very slowly, to turn. 0.6 kilometers per hour. Destination, 22 kilometers away. It took 3 weeks. 22 kilometers, in 3 weeks. That is roughly 1 kilometer a day, which is a pace that makes glaciers look ambitious. And it is the only vehicle journey I know of where the correct way to follow it was on foot, and the correct thing to bring was lunch. Because that is what happened. It walked, and 70 people walked with it, not aboard it, around it. Alongside it, the Bagger 288 crossed the Rhineland at the center of a slowly moving crowd of surveyors and electricians and engineers, all of them on the ground, all of them at the pace of the thing itself, watching the earth in front of the tracks and the sky above the arm and the enormous black cable being dragged along behind. And it moved through countryside that was, in every ordinary sense, occupied. This was not a wilderness. This is one of the more densely populated parts of Europe. The route lay across farmland that belonged to people, past villages where people were making dinner, and the machine went through it at walking pace, over a period of 3 weeks, 96 meters tall. Try to hold the image from the ground. You are in Elsdorf, or somewhere near it, in February. It is grey. You go to the window with a cup of coffee, and on the horizon, where yesterday there was a field, there is a structure the height of the Statue of Liberty. You go to work. You come back. It has moved about 400 meters. The next day it is a little nearer, and the next. Not approaching exactly, arriving over the course of a fortnight the way weather arrives. There is no sound of an engine because there is no engine, so what you get instead is that same slow creaking of steel carried across the fields, getting fractionally louder every day. Children were taken out of school to see it. Of course they were. There are photographs of it from that winter with people standing at the edge of the fields, in coats, hands in pockets, just watching. Not much to watch. That is rather the point. Now, the obstacles. There were 4 kinds of thing on that line, and each one had to be solved on its own terms. The first was roads, ordinary ones, the sort that connect villages. These are easy in principle. Close the road, put down enough material to carry the load, walk across, take it up again, hand the road back. The Bagger 288 crossed several of them, and each crossing shut a road for a day or 2, and somewhere there is a diversion sign in a German municipal storeroom that once said, in effect, road closed, excavator. The second was the railway, a live line with trains on it, which cannot be closed for a fortnight because the country needs it. So the machine timed it. It arrived, it waited, the line was blocked for a window, the tracks were protected, and 13,500 tons crossed the rails at 10 meters a minute, while somewhere a signaller held a section clear and thought about what he was going to tell his wife. The third was the river, and the river was clever enough that it gets a chapter of its own. And the fourth was the Autobahn. Bundesautobahn 61 runs north to south through this part of Germany. It is a motorway in the German sense, which is to say, it is one of the more famous roads on the planet, carrying traffic at speeds that other countries regard as a hobby. And the Bagger 288 crossed it. I want to be precise about how absurd this is. The fastest road in the world, and the slowest vehicle in the world, meeting at right angles, in the rain, in February. You cannot bridge it. You cannot go under it. So you close it, you build a temporary surface across the carriageways, strong enough to carry a ground load spread over 12 tracks, and you walk the largest object ever driven across the tarmac at a speed of 10 meters in 60 seconds, and it takes as long as it takes, and the whole time, the A61 is not a motorway, it is a floor. There is a detail here that I love, and it is a detail about Germany as much as about the machine. Nobody panicked. There is no story of chaos. There was a plan, and the plan had been drawn up with the traffic authority and the railway and the water board and the farmers and the district councils, and the plan said that on such and such a day the machine would be at such and such a place, and it was. It behaved, it went where it was told. It arrived on schedule. 13,500 tons of machine crossed a motorway, a mainline railway, a river, and half a dozen roads, in the middle of a working countryside. And the most remarkable thing about it was how thoroughly unremarkable everyone involved decided it was going to be. For 3 weeks, it was simply out there in the fields, going home, at the speed of a slow thought. And then, at the end of the 3rd week, the ground began to slope down, and there was Garzweiler, and the machine walked to the face of the cut and stopped, and the wheel started to turn again, and that was that. It has never left, except we have skipped something. Because of everything on that route, the thing that should have stopped it dead was the smallest. 8 meters of water. The Erft is not an impressive river. It rises in the Eifel Hills, wanders north across the Rhineland, and joins the Rhine near Neuss. You could throw a stone across it. In most places, you could wade it without getting your knees wet. And it sat directly across the route, and it was the single most dangerous thing on the entire journey. Here is why, and it has nothing to do with depth. The Bagger 288 does not care about water. It cares about bearing. Everything about this machine, all of that beautiful arithmetic with the 12 tracks and the bicycle tire pressure, depends on one assumption, that the ground underneath it is uniform, spread 13,500 tons over a large enough flat area, and the ground takes it without complaining. Now put a ditch under one corner. A riverbank is the worst surface in the world for something like this. It is soft, saturated, and it slopes, and it is different on the left from the right. If one set of crawlers sinks even slightly further than the others, the whole machine begins to lean, and a machine that is 96 meters tall and leaning is not a vehicle with a problem. It is a falling object with a delay built in. There is no recovery from that. There is no correction. You would simply be watching $100 million go over sideways into a river in slow motion, and everybody standing near it would have plenty of time to appreciate what was happening, and no time at all to do anything about it. So the river had to go, not diverted, not dammed, not bridged. The engineers did something much simpler and much more audacious, and when you hear it, it sounds like a child's solution, and it is perfect. They put the river in a pipe. They laid large steel pipes in the bed of the Erft, so that the water could keep flowing through them and carry on downstream exactly as it always had. Then they filled in over the top with rocks and gravel, and graded it, and compacted it, until where there had been a river, there was now a wide, flat, level surface of stone, with a river running quietly through the middle of it, out of sight, doing its job. The Erft was never stopped. It was never even inconvenienced. It just went through a tunnel for a while, and then the largest vehicle on Earth walked over the top of it at 10 meters a minute and did not notice a thing. Understand what that solution actually is, because it is the whole philosophy of this project in one move. They did not fight the river. They did not try to overpower it, or divert it, or hold it back, which is what force would have done, and what force would have paid for later. They looked at the river and asked what it was actually doing, which was moving water from up there to down there, and then they let it carry on doing exactly that, in a pipe, underneath a temporary road, and they took the road away afterwards. It is the most elegant piece of engineering in this entire story, and it consists of pipes and gravel. But the detail that undoes me is not the river, it is the grass. Because parts of that route ran across valuable farmland, good ground, ground that had to be handed back to the people who owned it, in condition, once the machine had gone. And even a footprint is a footprint, if it is pressed into wet German topsoil in February by 12 steel tracks, each nearly 4 meters wide. So ahead of the machine, along the line it was going to take, they seeded special grass. Read that again. In order to move the heaviest vehicle in human history across a field, the engineers went out in front of it and planted a lawn. Not for appearance. Grass is not decoration here, it is engineering. A dense root mat binds the surface of the soil and turns loose, sodden earth into something coherent, something that holds together under load and does not smear or rut. They grew a living mattress across the countryside, on purpose, weeks in advance, and then walked 13,500 tons over it, so that the ground would still be worth something afterwards. Somewhere in an office in the Rhineland in the year 2000, there was a project plan for moving the largest object anyone has ever moved, and one of the line items on it was seed. That is the picture I would like you to keep from this whole chapter. Not the motorway, not the crowds. A field in the low grey Rhineland light, in the middle of winter, and a man walking across it, scattering grass seed, so that in a few weeks, a machine as tall as the Statue of Liberty can pass over this exact spot without hurting it. There is a version of this story where a giant monster stamps across Germany. That is the version people expect, and it is completely wrong. What actually happened was that 70 people spent months laying pipes so a small river would not be disturbed, and planting grass so a farmer's field would not be spoiled, and building a temporary floor over a motorway so that it could be given back by Thursday, in order that one machine could travel 14 miles at the speed of a stroll and leave almost nothing behind it. Which brings us to the money, and the reason any of this happened at all. Because all of that, the pipes, the gravel, the grass, the 70 workers, the closed motorway, 3 weeks of an entire mining company's attention, was the cheap option. 15 million German marks. That is what the walk cost, near enough. And that number is the answer to a question that has probably been bothering you for 2 chapters. Why on earth did they not just take it apart? Because they did not want to. Because taking it apart would have cost more. Not slightly more. Enough more that a company famous for its ruthless attention to industrial arithmetic looked at both columns and chose the one involving a motorway closure and a lawn. That is the fact, and it is verified, and it is completely counterintuitive, and here is why it is true. Start with what dismantling actually means, because the word is doing a lot of hiding. You cannot unbolt a bagger. Not in any sense that resembles taking apart a shelf. The machine is a welded structure. It is not an assembly of parts sitting next to each other. It is one continuous object, and the pieces that arrived from the Krupp works in the 1970s were joined into a single thing, permanently, in a field, over 5 years. So dismantling does not mean undoing. It means cutting. You bring in cranes. You bring in cutting crews. You section a 220-meter structure into pieces small enough for a road, and every one of those cuts is a wound you will have to close later, and every join you make on the other end has to be as good as the one that was made in the factory, or the thing fails, at 96 meters, with people inside it. Then you have to lift each section down without letting the rest of the structure fall over, which means temporary supports, which is an engineering project of its own on a machine designed to be held up by exactly one arrangement of steel and nothing else. Then you move it all. Thousands of tons of oversized load on the public road, in convoys, with police escorts, over weeks, because you cannot put a 50-meter section of bucket wheel arm on a lorry and simply set off. Every load needs a route survey. Every bridge needs checking. Every roundabout is a negotiation. And then, at the far end, you build it again. In the open, in the weather, in sequence, in the right order, with cranes, on a schedule, exactly as they did at Hambach, which took 5 years. 5 years. And that is the real number. That is where the argument was won, not in steel and not in cranes. Because while the machine is in pieces, it is not digging. That is the cost nobody sees. 240,000 cubic meters a day. Every single day, this machine is not standing at a face with its wheel turning, is a day that Garsweiler does not get its overburden lifted, which is a day the coal below it stays where it is, which is a day the power stations at Neurath and Niederaussem look elsewhere for fuel. The Bagger 288 is not a machine that costs money to run. It is a machine that prints value continuously, in soil, forever, and the only way to lose money on it is to switch it off. So the two options were never really cranes versus tracks. They were 3 weeks versus years. And once you write it that way, there is no decision left to make. 15 million marks and 21 days of walking is not the extravagant option. It is the frugal one. It is, in fact, the only one a sane accountant would sign, which produces the most beautiful inversion in this entire story, and I want to state it plainly. The reason the largest object ever moved on land was moved in one piece, across a motorway, over a river in a pipe, on a bed of specially planted grass, at 10 meters a minute for 3 weeks, in front of a crowd, is that it was cheaper. That is it. There was no grand vision. Nobody wanted a spectacle. 70 engineers did not set out to make one of the strangest journeys in industrial history. They ran the numbers, and the numbers said, walk. And so they walked. And the astonishing thing happened as a byproduct of being sensible. That is how this machine has done everything, from the very beginning. Nobody dreamed it. Nobody wanted a record. The heaviest vehicle in history exists because 6-to-1 is a difficult ratio. The wheel is 21 meters across, because that is what the volume demanded. There is no engine, because a cable is simply better. There is a kettle on board, because people need tea. And it crossed the A61 in February of 2001, because it was the low bid. Every extraordinary fact about the Bagger 288 is an ordinary decision that was allowed to go all the way to its logical end without anybody stopping it out of embarrassment. The machine reached Garsweiler. It walked down into the pit. It found a wall of Rhineland overburden, and the wheel came around, and 18 buckets went into the earth, and it went back to work as though nothing had happened, which, from its point of view, nothing had. It has been there ever since. 25 years, this year. And somewhere in the middle of that journey, while it was out in the open being photographed by half of Germany, the Bagger 288 became something it had never been designed to be, famous, which is where the trouble starts. Because almost everything the world believes about this machine is wrong, beginning with the title on the front of this video. The largest machine on Earth is not the largest machine on Earth. I have been calling it that all night, and so does everyone else, and it is on the front of this video, and it is not true. Not quite. And the ways in which it is not true are more interesting than the claim. Let me deal with them one at a time, because there are 4 titles in play here, and the Bagger 288 has held one, lost one, never had one, and quietly keeps another that nobody talks about. Start with what it genuinely won. In 1978, when the cable went live and the wheel first turned, it became the heaviest land vehicle in the world. That was real. The previous holder was an American machine called the Marion 6360, a colossal stripping shovel that worked the Ohio coalfields at 12,700 tons. The Bagger 288 weighs 13,500. It took the record by about 800 tons, which is roughly the weight of the Statue of Liberty thrown in as a rounding error. Heaviest thing ever driven anywhere. For 17 years, that was true. Then, in 1995, it lost it, and it lost it in the most humiliating way available. It lost it to its own brother. Bagger 293 was built by a different firm, Takraf, and it works the same Rhineland coalfield. It weighs 14,200 tons. 700 tons heavier. Same job, same landscape, same company, same fields. So the record for the heaviest land vehicle in human history did not go to another country, or another industry, or a rival superpower with something to prove. It moved about 30 kilometers sideways and stayed in the family. The Bagger 288 has spent the last 30 years as the second heaviest vehicle on Earth, working within sight of the machine that beat it. Now the title it never had at all. People call it the largest self-propelled vehicle in the world, and it is not, and you already know why, because you know about the cable. Self-propelled means it carries its own power. The Bagger 288 does not carry so much as a battery. That title belongs to something else entirely. Currently, a Chinese crawler crane called the XGC 88000, which is a fraction of the weight and has the singular advantage of being able to leave. And the title of largest land vehicle of any kind, by sheer physical dimensions, does not belong to the Bagger 288 either. It belongs to a group of machines called the F-60 conveyor bridges, built in what was then East Germany. And they are not tall, they are long, over 500 meters of steel, moving on rails across a coalfield, which is why the Germans call an F-60 the horizontal Eiffel Tower, and they mean it literally, because it is longer than the Eiffel Tower is high. So the Bagger 288 is not the heaviest, not the biggest, and not the most independent. 3 losses. Here is the one it still holds, and it shares it, and it is the one that actually matters. Tallest terrestrial vehicle in the world, Guinness certified, 96 meters, shared with its brother, 293, because on that one measure, the two of them are level. Which brings me to why everybody, including me, including you, including the title of this video, still calls the Bagger 258 the largest machine on Earth, despite all of the above. Because the records are the wrong way to look at it. Every one of those titles measures the machine as an object. Weight, length, height, whether the engine is inside or outside. Those are the questions you ask about a thing sitting still. And by those questions, the Bagger 288 is merely one of several extremely large German objects, and slightly the runner-up. But nobody ever fell in love with it because of a specification. What the Bagger 288 actually is the largest continuously operating alteration of the planet ever carried out by one device. It does not sit there being enormous. It converts a country into electricity at a rate of 1 football pitch, 30 meters deep, per day, without stopping, since 1978. Nothing on the specification sheet captures that, because there is no category for it. Guinness does not have a record for the most Earth ever moved by one machine in one lifetime, and if it did, there would be no competition and no ceremony, because the winner would be busy. The heavier brother is a fact. The longer conveyor bridge is a fact. The Chinese crane is a fact. And none of them are what people mean when they stand at a pit rim in the Rhineland at 2 in the morning, watching a wheel turn against the floodlights and say, out loud, that they cannot believe such a thing exists. They are not measuring it, they are reacting to it. And in that sense, the title on this video is not a lie. It is just not the kind of truth you can put in a table. Which raises something I have been putting off, and which you may have noticed a moment ago. I said brother, I said family. That was not a figure of speech. There are more of them. There are more of them, and this is the part of the story that nobody tells, because it ruins the myth. The Bagger 288 is not a one-off. It is not a monument. It is not the singular achievement of a heroic engineering program. It is a production model. Meet the family. Bagger 281 was built in 1958. Bagger 285 in 1975. Bagger 287 in 1976. Bagger 288 in 1978. Bagger 293 in 1995. Look at the pattern in those numbers, because it is doing something to your understanding of this machine right now. whether you have noticed or not. 281, 285, 285, 285. There are 287 of something before it. That serial number is not a title. It is a cue position. The Bagger 288 is not the 288th wonder of the world. It is the 288th item on a list, and the list started long before anyone was impressed by any of them. And notice the date on the oldest one, 1958. 20 years before our machine existed, they were already building these. 281 had been standing in a German pit, turning a wheel since before the Berlin Wall went up. By the time the Bagger 288 arrived, this was not a new idea being attempted. It was a mature technology on its umpteenth revision, and the engineers at Krupp were not inventing anything. They were doing the next one slightly larger because the ratio at Hambach demanded it. Now look at the gaps: 58, 75, 76, 78, 95. That is a company building an enormous machine roughly whenever it needed one, which is a sentence that should not be possible. These things take a decade and cost $100 million, and Rheinbraun was ordering them the way a haulage firm orders lorries. Not with ore, with a purchase order. So the Rhineland is not a place with a giant machine in it. The Rhineland is a place with a herd, and they work together. That is the part that really rearranges the picture. Right now, in the pits west of Cologne, several of these things are standing at different levels of the same enormous stepped hole, each one on its own bench, each one sweeping its own face, all of them feeding the same web of conveyor belts. The Bagger 288 is not a solitary titan striding across the landscape. It is one animal in a herd, grazing its own terrace, connected by rubber to all the others. Nobody photographs the herd. Everybody photographs one of them, in isolation, against a sunset, and calls it the largest machine on Earth, and never mentions that there is another one just like it, a kilometer to the left, and a bigger one a kilometer beyond that. Which raises the obvious question, and it is the one I find genuinely funny. Why this one? Why is the Bagger 288 the famous one? 287 is 2 years older and slightly longer. 293 is heavier and taller by exactly nothing, and does precisely the same job. If you want the record holder, it is not our machine. If you want the pioneer, that is 281 from 1958. Nobody has heard of any of them. 293 is the heaviest vehicle ever built by human beings. The current holder, right now, tonight. And it has no fans. It has no song. There are no videos of it at 3 in the morning helping strangers fall asleep. It is a complete unknown, and it is bigger than the one you clicked on. So what did 288 have? It had February of 2001. That is the entire difference. That is all of it. 287 and 293 stayed in their pits, where machines belong, doing the work, invisible, below the rim of a hole, where nobody can see them and there is nothing to give them scale. And 288 came out. For 3 weeks, it stood up out of the ground and walked across the ordinary world. It crossed a motorway that people drive on. It went past a village where people live. It appeared in the frame next to a hedgerow and a telephone pole and a farmhouse. And for the first time, anybody could see what 96 meters actually means, because it was standing next to something they knew the size of. A giant in a hole is just a hole. A giant in a field is a giant. Everything the world knows about the Bagger 288 comes from those 3 weeks. Every photograph, every documentary, every piece of footage. It did not become famous for what it does, which is unimaginable, or for what it is, which is a record it does not hold. It became famous because in 2001, an accountant decided that walking was cheaper, and the machine was accidentally seen. And once a thing has been seen, people do the rest. They give it a personality, they give it intentions. they start to wonder what it wants. And in 2009, somebody wrote it a song. In 2009, a British comedian called Joel Veitch released a song called Bagger 288. Not about the Bagger 288. Called it. The Machine is the title, the subject, and, as far as the song is concerned, the hero. Veitch was a strange choice for a laureate. He was an internet animator, one of the first people to work out that the web wanted daft things in short form, best known for videos of kittens performing rock songs. The Bagger 288 track appeared on an album called Spongs in the Key of Life, which tells you the tone. It is not a documentary. It is not reverent. And what the song says about the machine is this. The leaders of the world got together and decided that humanity was in danger, and so they built the Bagger 288 to protect us. From what? From Godzillas. And from doom robots from the future. That is the premise. The heaviest vehicle ever built by human beings is, in the song, a defensive weapon constructed by the united governments of Earth to fight monsters and time-traveling machines. And it is going to save us all. And the chorus is the machine's name shouted with enormous conviction. And the video is just footage of it working. That is what makes it perfect. Veitch did not need to animate anything. He took clips from a German television documentary about bucket wheel excavators in the Ruhr and cut them to the song, and the joke lands entirely because the real machine looks exactly like the machine the song describes. Nothing had to be exaggerated. The footage is straight. It is simply a wheel turning in the Rhineland at 10 meters a minute, and over the top of it, a man is singing about doom robots, and the two fit together with no gap at all. The song became a cult thing, and it is, as far as I can tell, the only love song ever written to a piece of mining equipment. It was not the last time. In 2012, the Bagger 288 turned up in a film, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, which is not a good film, and which contains a sequence in which the hero takes possession of a bucket wheel excavator and turns it into a burning instrument of destruction, because somebody in the production looked at the machine and had precisely the thought everybody has. That is a weapon, and it is not. That is the whole point. It has never been a weapon. It has no enemies. It has never fought anything in its life. It is an appliance, owned by an electricity company for the purpose of moving soil, operated by 5 people with a kettle, at the speed of a slow walk, and its most heroic act in 48 years was crossing a motorway without incident. So why does everybody reach for the same idea? Because the Bagger 288 breaks a rule we did not know we had. Everything at that scale, in our imagination, is a creature or a catastrophe. 96 meters tall, moving, with a mouth. There is nothing in human experience to compare that to, except a monster, and so the mind supplies one. It has to. We have myths for giants and myths for machines, and we do not have a myth for a giant that is a machine and is calmly doing paperwork. There is also the shape. Look at it, and you cannot help it. The long arm, the wheel like a head, the body slung between enormous feet, the cable trailing behind, like something feeding it. Nobody designed that to look like anything. Every line of it is the consequence of a load calculation, and it comes out looking so much like a living thing that a comedian, a film studio, and every person who has ever seen a photograph of it all arrive independently at the same conclusion. It looks like it wants something. It does not want anything. That is the fact under all of this, and it is the reason the song is funny and the film is silly and the machine is, in the end, more unsettling than either. The Bagger 288 has no intentions. It has never had a thought. It does not know it is famous, does not know it is the second heaviest object ever driven, does not know that somewhere on the internet there are people who love it. It has no opinion about the coal, or the villages, or the climate, or the century it happens to be in. There is only a wheel and a face of earth in front of it. and a cable behind it, and a specification that says 240,000 cubic meters a day. We are the ones who made it a character. We wrote it a song and gave it enemies and put it in a film, because the alternative is looking directly at what it actually is, which is a device we built on purpose to eat our own country, and which is extremely good at it. And the countryside it is eating is not empty. There are people out there in the dark, at the edge of the pit, and they have been watching this machine come towards them for a very long time. In 1978, two things happened in the Rhineland. The Bagger 288 was finished, and the mining company bought a forest. The forest is called the Hambacher Forst, and it is not a wood in the ordinary sense. It is old, genuinely old, oak and hornbeam, growing continuously on that ground for something like 12,000 years, since the last ice retreated, one of the last remnants of the ancient woodland that once covered this whole corner of Europe. It ran to about 5,500 hectares. Today, roughly a tenth of it is left. The rest is the whole. The coal was underneath it, and the coal had to be got at, and everything on top of coal is overburden, and a 12,000-year-old forest is, in the language of the industry, simply the top layer. That is the sentence that explains most of what happened next in this part of Germany. Because in the 2000s and the 2010s, people began to climb the remaining trees and stay there. They built tree houses. They occupied the woodland, sometimes for years, in the winter, in the rain, in structures 30 meters up in the canopy. The camps were cleared and rebuilt and cleared again. In 2018, there was a large eviction, and 3 years later, a court in Münster ruled that the way it had been carried out was unlawful, which changed nothing about the trees, but told you something about how contested the ground had become. And then there was Lützerath. Lützerath was a hamlet at the western edge of the Garzweiler mine, not a town, a handful of farms and houses at the end of a road, of no particular note, sitting directly on the coal. In October of 2022, the German government, the state government, and RWE made a deal. And it is worth stating exactly what was in it, because both halves are real, and people disagree fiercely about the trade. RWE would be allowed to take the coal under Lützerath. The company and the federal government argued that Germany needed it. This was the winter of the energy crisis. Russian gas had stopped. The country was looking at its own grid and doing sums that nobody enjoyed. And the ministers who signed that deal, including 2 from the Green Party, took the view that the fuel under that hamlet was the price of keeping the lights on. In exchange, 2 things. The end of lignite burning at RWE was pulled forward from 2038 to 2030. 8 years gone from the clock, and 5 villages that had been scheduled to disappear would not disappear. Keienberg, Kukum, Berverath, Oberwestrich, Unterwestrich, all of them west of Lützerath, all of them next in the machine's path, all of them, after the deal, staying exactly where they are. Supporters called it the best available trade. 1 empty hamlet for 5 living villages, and 8 fewer years of coal. Opponents called it a betrayal, and said the coal under Lützerath was never needed, and that the arithmetic had been written to fit the answer, and in January of 2023, around 2,000 people walked to the hamlet to say so. The clearance went ahead. I am not going to tell you who was right about that. People far angrier and better informed than me have been arguing it for years, and they are not finished. But I will tell you what it means at ground level, because that is the part that gets lost. Keienberg is a village that is more than 1,000 years old. Before the resettlement, more than 800 people lived there. Over the years, most of them left. They were offered new houses in a new Keienberg, built a few kilometers away, and most families took the offer, because the mine was coming and everyone knew it. And you cannot raise children in a village with a date on it. So by the time the deal was signed and the village was saved, The village was mostly empty. That is the situation right now. Kyenberg stands. The houses are there. The church is there. The farms are there. And some of them are magnificent. And most of the doors are locked, because the people left before the reprieve arrived, and the resettlement paperwork is officially still running into the middle of this decade. There are plans now to bring it back to life. There is a word for a village saved but not inhabited, and I do not know it in any language. And at the edge of it, a few 100 meters away, the ground stops. That is where the pit begins. That is where a farmer named Norbert Winsen has his land, right on the rim, and he is the man from the very start of this video. The one who wanted you to know that the first thing about the machine is not the size. It runs constantly, he said. Every day, every night, Sundays, even on Christmas. That is what it is to live beside this thing. Not a monster, not a villain, not a doom robot from the future. A sound, in the dark, at the end of the field, that has never once stopped in your whole life, and that got closer every year until, one autumn, somebody in Berlin signed a piece of paper and it stopped getting closer. The Bagger 288 does not know any of this happened. It went on turning through all of it. The tree houses, the courts, the deal, the protest, the clearance. Not one revolution of the wheel was different. But the paper is real, and the date on it is real. And for the first time in 48 years, the machine has one. 2030. That is the date. RWE says it will end lignite production at the Garsweiler mine in 2030. And the national law behind it, the Coal Phase-Out Act, sets 2038 as the outside limit for the country as a whole. 4 years from now, give or take, the reason for the Bagger 288 stops existing. Not the machine. The machine will be fine. That is the extraordinary part. In 2026, it is 48 years old, and there is nothing wrong with it. It has run for decades without a serious mechanical failure. The steel is good. The motors turn. The wheel comes around 18 buckets at a time, exactly as it did in 1978. And if you left it alone, it would keep doing that into the 22nd century, because there is very little to wear out on a thing that never goes fast and never gets hot and has no engine to break. The Bagger 288 is not going to die of old age. It is going to be made unnecessary, which is a different thing entirely, and, I think, a stranger one. Right now, Garsweiler lifts between 20 and 25 million tons of lignite a year, 3 shifts, around the clock, and sends it by belt and by its own railway to Neurath and Niederaussem. There is a version of the law where some units are held in reserve for a few years for security of supply, and there is enough coal at Garsweiler to cover that if it happens. But the direction is set. The pit has a last day now. Somebody will eventually know the date of it, and on that day, the wheel stops. Think about what that actually means, because I have been sitting with it, and I cannot make it ordinary. Since 1978, that wheel has essentially not stopped. Not for weekends, not for Christmas, not for the fall of the Berlin Wall, or reunification, or the Deutschmark becoming the euro. It turned through the whole of the internet. It was turning before most people watching this were born, and it has not paused since. And then, one afternoon, in a few years, in an ordinary week, someone in a cab, 96 meters up, will bring the last bucket around and set the arm down and go through a shutdown procedure, and the noise that the farms at Kyenberg have lived inside for a generation will not be there. There will be silence at the edge of that field for the first time in 50 years. Now, what do you do with it? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine problem, and nobody has a clean answer, and every available option is faintly absurd. You cannot sell it. Who is buying? There are no other customers. The market for a 13,500-ton machine that only works in soft overburden and only in a pit already fitted with a matching conveyor network and a 30,000-volt supply consists entirely of companies that already have their own. You cannot move it. Well, you can, at 10 meters a minute, but only to somewhere else in the Rhineland. And everywhere else in the Rhineland is closing too. That is the whole point. You cannot leave it. A machine like this cannot simply be parked and forgotten in a field that is going to become farmland and a lake. So the honest answer for the Bagger 288 and its whole family is that most of them will be cut up, torn down where they stand, and sold as steel, which is exactly what dismantling would have cost in 2001, except that this time nobody minds the price, because there is nothing waiting at the other end. It will take years. It will be done with cranes and cutting gear by people who are very good at it, and it will be the reverse of the 5 years it took to build it in that field near Hambach, and at the end of it there will be a flat place where the largest vehicle in human history used to stand, and 13,500 tons of steel will be poured into new things, and some of that steel is currently the bucket that is lifting the coal, that is making the electricity, that is powering the light you might be reading by. That is not a tragedy. I want to be careful here, because there is a very easy sentimental move available, and it is not honest. Nobody is losing anything they loved. It is not a whale. It is a device that a company bought to do a job, and the job is ending because a country decided, through its own arguments and its own elections and its own difficult compromises, that it would rather not burn that particular coal. The Bagger 288 has no opinion about that. It never had an opinion about anything, but it does leave a hole, a real one, several hundred meters deep and many kilometers wide, in a corner of Germany where there used to be a forest 12,000 years old, and villages 1,000 years old, and beet fields, and after the machine is gone, that hole is still going to be there. So the last question of the night is the only one that really matters. What happens to a place after something like this has finished with it? The answer, it turns out, is water. There is a lake in eastern Germany called the Gremmener Sea. People swim in it. There is a beach. In the summer, families come with towels, and small children run into the shallows and complain about the temperature. And it is, by any measure, a perfectly nice lake. It is not a lake. It is a hole. Until 1991, it was the Golper Nord opencast mine, one of the East German lignite pits, worked by up to 1,000 miners. Then the coal ran out, and the country it belonged to had already stopped existing, and the pit was abandoned, and the water came up, the way water does when you stop pumping, and filled it. And on a peninsula sticking out into that water, 5 enormous machines are standing. They are called Ferropolis, the city of iron. When the mine closed, somebody had the idea, and it came out of the Bauhaus school at Dessau, that instead of cutting the machines up, they would be gathered onto one spit of land and simply left there. Bucket wheel excavators, stackers, dredgers, up to 30 meters high and over 100 meters long, hauled in from around the region and parked, permanently facing the water. They gave them names, not serial numbers, names: Mad Max, Big Wheel, Medusa, and now people dance there. Ferropolis is one of Germany's great festival venues. Every summer, tens of thousands of people arrive for melt and splash and heavy metal weekends and classical concerts. And they drink warm beer in a former coal pit at 2 in the morning, while the lights play across the rusting arms of machines that spent 40 years eating this exact place. There are school groups, there is a lift in one of them so anyone can go up. There are solar panels on the roofs of the old workshops, and in the museum, in a glass case, there is a skeleton of a forest elephant that lived on this ground about 120,000 years ago. That is the whole story of this video in one building. The elephant, the swamp, the coal, the machine, the hole, the water, and a teenager in a bucket hat asleep on the grass at 4 in the morning. The Rhineland is going the same way, and it is already planned. Where the Bagger 288 is standing tonight, there will be a lake, a large one, The filling is expected to begin from around the middle of the 2030s, and it will take decades, and eventually the water will come up against the edge of the fields at Kienberg, and the village that was saved, but is mostly empty, will be a village on a shore. The ground the machine has already finished with is doing something even stranger. It has been given back. RWE has been recultivating behind itself for years, and the results are not what you expect. It is farmland again, good farmland, and there are wind farms standing on the new plains, and the open landscape that comes out the far end of all this turns out to suit certain species rather well. The birds and plants that like flat ground and rough edges, and the biodiversity in some of those recultivated areas is genuinely high, which leaves the strangest fact of the night, and it is the one I promised you at the beginning. Nothing here is being destroyed. Everything here is being moved. That is what a bagger actually does, and I have taken 20 chapters to get to it. It does not consume anything. Nothing is lost. The soil that comes off the top goes onto a belt and is put back down somewhere else, and the coal is turned into heat and light and ends up as warmth in a room somewhere in North Rhine-Westphalia, and the whole fills with water, and the water becomes a lake, and the lake gets a beach, and the machines get names and a music festival. 20 million years ago, a tree fell into a swamp at the edge of a sinking basin and failed to rot. Tonight, a wheel 21 meters across is turning in the dark and lifting it out, at 10 meters a minute, watched by 5 people with a kettle. In 4 years, roughly, that wheel will stop, and it will be the first time in half a century, and the farms at the pit edge will hear something they have never heard, which is nothing, and then the water will come. And in 50 years, there will be a lake in the Rhineland with sailing boats on it, and the people on those boats will be floating 300 meters above the place where the coal was, and almost none of them will know that the largest vehicle that ever moved once walked across a motorway to get here, on a bed of specially planted grass, at the speed of a slow thought, because it was cheaper. The machines do not last. The holes do not last. Even the coal, which waited 20 million years, did not last. Only the moving lasts. Everything is on its way to being somewhere else, and it always has been, and the bagger 288 is simply the loudest, largest, most patient piece of evidence we have ever built. 10 meters a minute, 18 buckets, 1 wheel turning in the German dark. It is still going, right now, while you are lying there. It will still be going in the morning. Sleep well. My dear sleep science lovers, could you please say in the comments where you're watching from right now? Also, good news. Simple Sleepy Science episodes are now available for free on Spotify. Use the link in the description or on the channel profile to enjoy our stories there.